On October 1st, Paul and Jane made a trip to the cinema to see the new James Bond film in London. Meanwhile, over 1,000 kilometres away, behind the Iron Curtain, A Hard Day's Night was shown in Prague, marking the first time a Western pop film had been screened behind the Iron Curtain.
They changed everything, and they opened the whole world. It was all brought by them, by the Beatles.
И спасибо Beatles, которые внесли свою посильную лепту в развал этой.
The 1st of October also brought the addition of a new member of the Beatles party. Chauffeur Alf Bicknell started working for the group.
John's was the sharpest. George was very subtle. Ringo was more straightforward, and Paul would sort of, his sort of humour would slide up along the side of you, and it would have all happened before you realised actually what had taken place, you know. But in a crowd, with their humour, they were like vultures.
You know, and I used to be dressed in the whole livery of outfit, you know, dark suit, tie, and the hat. Suddenly the window opened behind me one day. A hand came forward and took the hat from the top of my head and threw it out of the window. And as I glanced sideways, I could see this hat gradually disappearing. But my hat. John leans forward and taps me on the shoulder. And he says to me, Alf, you don't need the hat anymore. You're one of us.
On the 2nd, Brian Epstein's autobiography, A Cellar Full of Noise, was published. This saw him feature in a few TV spots over the month, including an interview on the BBC the previous day.
This unimposing piece of paper, signed in December 1961, was the start of a venture that shook the world of show business. A young, unknown Liverpool businessman signed up 4 rather scruffy, unknown lads with no experience of management and with the handicap of being provincial. They crashed into Tin Pan Alley. In 1963, several hit records and a royal variety show later, Beatlemania hit Britain. Brian Epstein, the man who built the Beatles into a cult, is now as well known as they are. And next week, his book, called A Cellar Full of Noise, is published, and in it he relates his own personal history. You wrote in this book, we knew that America would make us or break us as world stars. In fact, she made us. I noticed, going through the book, that you're always referring to the Beatles as us and we. You know, how much do you identify yourself with them?
This is strange, actually, because in the beginning, I was very fierce about the business of the manager not being known at all. Fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know, but it's just happened to me, actually. And
was it consciously done? Were you conscious of doing this?
Not really.
Sort of projecting
not at all. Actually, for a long time, for at least 12 months afterwards, you know, I was careful about even letting my name be mentioned. And I believe I was told by a reporter from a national newspaper that I was very awkward with my first interview. But it did happen. You know, I quite enjoy sort of doing programs and bits of television and things now. I mean,
you enjoy it, but do you ever envy the Beatles?
No, no.
What don't you envy about them then?
Well, I couldn't do obviously I couldn't do what they do. It's not my job.
Can I quote from another part of the book? You say, though I employ the sort of people who can make wise and honourable decisions, I'm loath to give them the power to do so. Now, why do you find yourself unable to delegate this kind of power?
I don't know. I've always found this in all sorts of businesses in which I've been connected, that I am not good at delegating. I've had to delegate a good deal of responsibility now because of the growth of the number of acts which we handle and so on, but I don't find this easy.
How far are your artists governed by your sense of good taste? I mean by that, how much do your views influence them?
I think to a certain extent.
Both in their private life and in their performance?
Also to a certain extent, yes. It's difficult to say this because it depends on the artist concerned. It depends how much they bring of themselves or they wish me to bring of myself.
Don't you ever feel that you're in a position of exploiting them? Because a lot of people complain about managers that they are parasitic.
Mm.
How do you always react to that?
I do feel this, and I'm very careful, desperately careful, not ever to exploit them. I think this is terribly important. And I was very conscious of this kind of thing when I entered the business.
Are you still conscious of it now?
Yes.
You still feel, I must not exploit this person?
Yes, absolutely. I still feel that even if they don't want to know about a certain contract or a certain fee or something, it's my duty to inform them, even though they may throw the bit of paper away on which I tell them.
But doesn't this make life terribly uncomfortable for you?
No, not at all. I think many of my artists are conscious of the fact that I do want them to know what's going on, and I do not try to exploit them consciously anyway.
Well, you've certainly produced a cellar full of noise. Brian Epstein, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Also on the 2nd of October, the Beatles began rehearsals for their appearance on the television program Shindig, which they would film the following day.
Phenomenon of the century, the Beatles!
I'm a loser, and I'm not what I appear to be. Forgot the word.
I can't get it. The next one. Clear stage.
On the 4th, they headed to Hyde Park for a photo shoot for their upcoming album.
This was the one taken in the park in half an hour at the end of the day. I say half an hour because that's all I had for the light. The sun is going down. I knew that this was what they call the magic hour, photographically, when you get that warm light. I used a telephoto lens, kept it wide open so the background would go out of focus. So it was a risky shot, handheld, done in a very short period of time. After I'd taken the photograph, I saw the autumn leaves on the ground, because we're now in October. So although it looks warm as an image, they had to wear overcoats to keep warm. I saw these autumn leaves on the ground and decided to climb a tree and get a shot of them down from the tree, looking down with the autumn leaves in the background. This, in black and white, ends the book, but it was used as a cover in color for an album called Early Beatles Hits in America.
That is a rather nice cover. That's Robert Freeman. Nice photos. We showed up in Hyde Park near the Albert Memorial, and I was quite impressed by George's hair there. It was a marvellous little turnip top he managed to create.
On October 6th, they headed to EMI to record a new song called 8 Days a Week.
Just go through it anyway if it make mistakes, just to practice it.
8 Days a Week was a landmark recording in that it was the first time the Beatles took an unfinished idea into the studio and experimented with different ways of recording it. Although it was to become the first pop song to feature a faded up introduction, the session tapes reveal that this was not the original plan. Take 1 was played straight, no frills, on acoustic guitar. On take 2, John and Paul introduced a set of harmonies that climbed the scale to precede the first guitar strum. On take 3, they merged the first 2 ideas, rising harmonies and acoustic guitar. On take 4, the harmonies were altered to remain on the same pitch throughout, rather than climbing the register. Also, in between takes, John struck gold, playing a guitar riff that was put in their back pocket to be used for a future song.
I used to go out to John's house in Weybridge to write songs, and at that particular time I had been busted for speeding, so I had to have a driver to take me out there, and we were chatting on the way. I remember saying to the guy, well, how you been? You know, you been busy? And he said, oh, yeah, mate. He said, I've been working 8 days a week. And then went into John's house. I said, right, I've got the title, 8 days a week. And we wrote it there and then.
After completing 8 days a week, John, Paul and Ringo went to the Ad Lib Club, where they spent the evening with Cilla Black, Mick Jagger and the Ronettes. On the 7th, the boys had a huge photo session for Fabulous magazine. They were photographed by Bill Francis and Robert Whittaker. Fabulous magazine editor, Unity Hall, has described the extreme secrecy that went into the session. She also said that she nearly fell off her chair when Tony Barrow called up suggesting that the Beatles were available for a photo session. He said, "We thought it would be a good Christmas present for you." She said they booked the most private studio possible, ordered boxes of Coca-Cola and champagne as well as sausages and sandwiches. They even had a Christmas cake and tree. The Beatles ended up arriving an hour late and were exhausted, likely hungover from the previous night at the Ad Lib Club. Ringo went into the corner and sat down, looking into space. He said he was tired. John collapsed on the nearest chair and asked, "Is there any milk? And give me 2 apples and a banana." George poured himself a Coca-Cola, and Paul, clearly the most energetic, walked around saying hello to everyone who was around. Then he went to the far end of the studio, where he began to help the photographer install the scenery. The next day, while walking around St. John's Wood before their session at EMI, Paul began writing a new song, She's a Woman. He then kept working on it at home, before leaving for the studio with a new song almost fully formed. Both the afternoon and evening sessions were entirely devoted to finishing off the lyrics and then recording She's a Woman for the next single.
Well, we're going to record for 4 days. We're making an album and a new single out of it with any luck.
I didn't know that when we were playing at the Cavern that we'd be on the Royal Variety performance. And after that, all the papers said, well, what's left for them? So then we went to America. They said, what's left for them then? You know, and we got into making better albums and stuff.
I used to play them, you know, the first 4 albums one after the other, just to see the progression musically, and it was interesting. I mean, you could hear the progression as we learned about recording, as the techniques got refined and everything like that. You could hear it.
In London on the 9th, 2 missing girls from Cleveland were found. They had snuck off to London in hopes of meeting the Beatles.
And you were a huge fan?
Huge fan from the very beginning, yeah.
And so the concert gets shut down, and I mean, what did you even think was going on at the time?
Well, I knew what was going on because all these crazy girls mostly were just like rushing down the aisles, and I was devastated, thinking, how could you be doing this? You're ruining the whole concert we worked so hard to get to.
Right.
It was pandemonium. And it was in the middle of the 3rd song that the Beatles were singing, and then it was just shut down. You know, and then there was a lot of taking the Beatles off the stage and pulling George off the stage and then coming back on the stage. You know, they got everything settled down. Harry Martin from Martin and Howard radio show, he and Specs came out on the stage and they got everybody to promise to take their seats.
Oh, we need to behave, right?
So after all that, that's when this kind of, is that when the kind of the inspiration hit to kind of go?
No, the inspiration hit the very first time I heard I Want to Hold Your Hand on the radio.
So even before you saw them live?
December 26, 1963, that was when I first heard I Want to Hold Your Hand, when Jerry G was playing it on the radio. And I became instantly transformed into a different girl. I was automatically a Beatlemaniac, and then my girlfriend and I, teen magazines, you know, everything Beatles, Beatles, Beatles. I read in one of the Beatle magazines that the Beatles hung out in Soho in London in clubs, and I said, we got to go.
So, but you're living in a foster home at the time, right?
Well, I was living with my great aunt.
Okay.
She was my legal guardian.
So you just grabbed your girlfriend and you said, let's go to London?
To Soho. Yeah.
So you, at 16 years old.
Where I'm going to live forever. I want to live in Beatleland where life is happy.
Right, right.
Oh my gosh. Well, so then you go, and then you go to clubs, you're following the band, you hitchhiked to Liverpool. You're young, 16 years old, and now you're in a whole different country.
Yeah, but this was the age of innocence, where you didn't worry about anything, you know. And I was where I wanted to be, live music every night. I mean, we had been to a club where the Rolling Stones had been the house band just 2 weeks prior. Wow. And they're talking about, have you girls heard of the Kinks, you know?
But that caused this whole big, this international incident.
Yeah, because we didn't know anybody was looking for us at all, because we weren't watching TV, listening to the radio. We were living that life, you know, we were in it. We were part of the...
Meantime, back home, here, you were missing.
Missing, yeah.
And there you go, there's your missing persons posters. So then, how did you find out you need to come back home? So you were in school, or was it summer?
No,
you just left
skipped school that day.
Yeah. Okay.
And the next morning, took a cab to Hopkins and got on a TWA flight.
How did they eventually get you back here, and then what happened after that?
Well, what happened was after 23 days we were over there, right? 23 days. Like, that could never happen today.
Right, oh, for sure.
How did you get money?
Oh, well, that was my friend's college fund.
Oh, my gosh! Wow.
So how did they get you back?
Okay, so I'm walking down the street with my very cool Liverpool musician boyfriend down Oxford Street in London, thinking everything's fine. And all of a sudden, Bobby comes up to me and he says, "Excuse me, miss, would you happen to be from Cleveland, Ohio?" And I said, well, yes, I am. Why do you ask?
Yeah.
As if I don't know,
Sure.
right? He says, well, there's a couple of girls that are here on holiday, and they haven't written home, and their parents are worried about them. And you seem to resemble one of them. Can we just take a little walk over to the police station just to check it out?
Wow.
So there's Mick and I walking hand in hand, and Mick is looking at me saying, "Do you know what this is about?" And I said, yeah, I'm the girl they're looking for.
Oh, my goodness.
Broken hearts, you know.
Yeah.
So we get to the police station, and the Bobby points up, and we see these posters, you know, missing. A picture of me and my friend. And
oh, my gosh.
I looked at it and I said, now I see why you made the mistake, because the resemblance is uncanny.
Oh, my. Unfortunately, we're only through the first half of the first chapter. You have lived in an amazing life. Did you ever meet the Beatles?
Close, but no cigar. No, I know.
Well, you're going to hear all about it coming up.
While the girls were discovered and sent back to the US, the Beatles began their UK tour. The tour started in Bradford, and on the drive up there, they stopped for lunch at the Old English Hotel.
I was 10 years old at school. My mum had had a phone call at the bank to come back to work, which is here at the Old England, and she very sensibly came to school to collect me. She took me outside and I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "The Beatles are at the Old England, the Beatles are at the Old England." She was really excited because they were with me, and we stood here to wave them off. And by then a few villagers had arrived and were wondering what was going on, and then few realised, you know, it was the Beatles in the car park. But there wasn't uproar, everyone was very polite. They just were really, I think, a bit stunned. So we were standing here, and they were getting in the car, and Paul McCartney stopped, and he said, "Does a little girl want a picture?" And I ran across and stood by him, and he waited so we can have our picture taken. On the picture, that the others are getting in the car, but he's standing all on his own with me, which is just wonderful, and I've always treasured that picture. Yeah, it was a busy time, and they were doing their autographs at the same time. That's when I lost my autograph. It was given to the man from the paper shop, so that was a bit sad. And then they went off.
In Bradford, at Soundcheck, they worked on a new song called "I Feel Fine," building on the riff that John played in the studio a few days earlier. The day, of course, was John's 24th birthday, and after the concert they headed to a Jacobin mansion called the Cavalier Country Club. Their arrival at the club was so secret that club owners Freddie and Rita Pearson didn't even tell their daughters.
My father, because they paid by cheque, their total bill for staying here, dinner and staying overnight, was £42, 13 and sixpence. And he wrote to the bank manager and said, "Could we have the cheque back as a memento. And we have this wonderful letter from the Midland Bank at the time. He says, "I'm afraid they are never likely to have the same value as the Bayeux tapestry, but I trust it will serve your purpose." Years before coming back to Halifax in the 50s. And he had a contact there who was involved in the music business, knew Brian Epstein, was involved with the Beatles from the early days. He got in touch with my father, knew that they'd started this private members club, that it was a lovely house in the country, and he said, "Could I bring the Beatles?" And of course, my father said yes, but it all has to be very hush-hush, you know, nobody must know, you mustn't tell your daughters, all those sort of things. The room, which is now an office, was where my sister and I slept, our bedroom, and we gave this up to John and Ringo.
Tight
So they
squeeze.
slept in here. Yes, it did. I'm sure it did.
No graffiti on the walls then or anything?
No, sadly, they didn't sign their name. We would never have pasted. I was on the stairs trying to get a peep of anything, but was too young to be allowed to come downstairs and see them. The next morning, I was up at the crack of dawn thinking that they'd come down for breakfast, which they didn't. By 11 o'clock, still no sign of them. And I was nearly in tears because I could see that the cars were pulling up outside and that they were going to go. My mother said, "This is ridiculous. Come on." And just went up to the door, knocked on the door and said, "Are you decent?" And I think it was Paul McCartney came to the door. "Yes, yes, Mrs. Pearson." She said, "My daughter's been waiting all morning to see you," and pushed me in.
What happens when you're pushed in then? Do you sort of freeze for a while, do you?
Yes, I did freeze, but they were so lovely. Paul McCartney offered me a cigarette, and I said, "Oh, no, I don't smoke." Thank you very much. And then we were chatting about where, I think he said to me, "Where did you go on holiday?" You know, to be, my sister, who was only 7, she hid because she was very shy. And by that time, Ringo and John had come into the big room where Paul and George were. No one could find my sister Kim. So everybody sort of went looking, and Ringo found her hiding behind a curtain and said, "Oh, come on out, Kim, and get this photograph." And she just remembers seeing this hand with lots of rings on it. I look back on it now and wish that but can one make more of those moments? You just have to live within that moment.
The tour continued, playing Leicester de Montfort Hall the following day, and Birmingham on the 11th. In Leicester, one fan, Richard Bruxton, who was present at the second show, gave his recollections. "I was there with my sister, and we were upstairs in the balcony. I remember looking down to see Mary Wells. She was terrific. I also remember that Tommy Quickly was on before the Beatles, and he was applauded. People liked him and thought that he did well, but maybe some of the applause was because of who was to follow. If we had been where we usually were, in the stalls underneath the overhang of the circle, it would have been claustrophobic with all the screaming." On October 12th, Brian became one of the directors of Bridor Cars Limited. Over the past year, Brian, the Beatles and other NEMS artists had spent fortunes on expensive cars, and Brian thought that if he had his own car dealership, they could buy exotic cars at wholesale prices. And Brian could make a huge profit from selling cars to other rock stars, who would use the firm's services simply because it's owned by Brian. The agency was headed by Terry Doran. He sold cars in Liverpool and earned himself a good name as a car dealer.
When did you first meet them? Liverpool. This takes back to where? To when?
64, I think. And the first time that I met them was, I was a friend of Brian Epstein.
Yes.
Who was the manager, as you know. And so I got to know them individually. Well, not individually at first, because I mean, it's like I had said hello to each one. But I really got to know John.
Yes.
I immediately clicked with John. There was some sort of like chemistry there between John and I, for the want of a better word. And sort of hung out with John for quite a long time.
Meanwhile, over in Canada, during a royal visit, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, was asked about the Beatles, and he said that they were on the wane. Next stop on the tour was Wigan. They didn't have time to stop for lunch because their car broke down on the way, but they arrived early enough to get a cup of soup.
I saw them in October 1964. Wow. I saw them at the ABC Cinema in Wigan. That's a few months before. Yeah. I saw them at the ABC Cinema in Wigan in October 1964. My mum took me. I just turned 4. Yeah. Before she passed away, for that book and for other things, I said to her, "Why did you take me?" And she always claims that she took me with an eye on posterity, because she knew that in later years, quite like I do now, always can say, when people in the pub are saying, "Who's the first band you ever saw?" You know, and people say, "Oh, you know, Dumpy's Rusty Nuts," or first house, 630, 830, 2 houses. I think a kind of Epstein, you know this more than me, Epstein sort of package show, I think, with...
It was the way all bands toured, all acts, not just bands, all acts toured that way. It was the old variety way of doing it, where every show has 2 houses, an early house and a second house.
And Tommy Sounds Incorporated, Tommy Quickly on the bill as well.
A comedian, a front cloth comic would come out to speak to the audience while the bands are behind the curtain plugging in. Yeah, unlike anything we know now.
Pictures exist of that Wigan gig. In 1965, I've seen them at the front row of Screaming Girls, and of course, I think I'd like to think that somewhere that you said that the magic, that was it, you know. But I certainly feel that way about Can't Buy Me Love. Yeah. Even every time I hear Can't Buy Me Love since, and so when Macca started with it Glastonbury last year, every time I hear Can't Buy Me Love, I think somewhere right back here in the recesses of my DNA, I get a hint of that magic again.
A trace memory.
Yeah,
I'm not surprised.
Before their show in Manchester on the 14th, the Beatles filmed a slot on the Scene at 6:30 television show. In Stockton on the 15th, they arrived an hour late, but they still had time to meet with the press. Ringo played a joke on them, hiding in the closet and then bursting out when they were wondering where he was.
You're pretty regular top of the pollsters. What do you think about this election business?
Very good.
Great, isn't it?
It's good stuff, this election stuff.
It's all right if you win.
Do you think it's harder being a politician than being a pop star?
Yes, definitely.
Probably. Very much so.
Has your father?
Never been a politician, though.
What has happened if you got all this?
Never been.
Don't take our money, Harold. What do you think is going to happen if you have to nationalise you then?
Southern Ireland.
Well, we'll have to move out, won't we? Yeah. Have to go live in Germany or someplace like that. Southern Ireland is nice down there.
It's only half an hour away.
Yeah.
Have you in actual fact had time to vote yourself?
No, we missed it actually. We
were having dinner at the time.
I think Paul had aspirations to become Prime Minister. Have you still got those ideas?
No, not politicians. It's a hard life, you see. It's a hard day's grind.
He said in a merry voice.
Like a cigarette?
I don't smoke at all, thank
you. They're going up,
I'll have to give those up, so.
None of these luxuries.
You don't mind if I smoke, do you?
Bad enough as it is.
Have you been heckled at all? Have you ever had...
Oh, yeah, we used to have it, especially in the early days.
Oh,
but John had a perfect answer. What was it? Shut up.
I had the joke about that. No, that was the other day.
During the last few weeks, the Grimman Group and the Hume Group and the Wilson Group have been edging off the papers. Have you been envious of all these group leaders?
No, we sell more records.
The whole
situation looks pretty Grimman, doesn't it?
That's a good one. Good old Doug.
Have any of the political parties actually contacted you and said, would you say publicly you'd vote for us?
Oh, no, because then the others don't buy the records.
What about this business of being on the wane? Is that all over?
Well, we get it about every 2 months. Somebody says, you're finished, you're on the wane. You know, they say Dave Clark's in, Brian Poole's in.
Are we?
You know, they're probably all in, but we're still having a good time ourselves.
You don't look too bad for four lads. You don't look too bad for four lads likely to be on your way to the dole queue, do you?
No, well, we passed one the other day, didn't we, Paul?
Yes, we passed. We're still on the dole as well, don't tell Harold.
Just getting back to the election for a moment, have you taken much interest in it? Have you...
Taken interest, you know, because it's interesting and it's exciting. But we didn't actually get the chance to vote, as we told you before.
Have you read the speeches?
Read them. Read the comics. Been away.
Saw the film.
Read the comics.
Have you watched the television?
Well, we will as soon as you go.
We'll get the telly in the next room.
Now, just finally, one thing. What would you like to see a new government bring in?
More wine. Yes, I think that's about it. More wine.
And you know, better things for everyone, but I mean, that's what anyone wants anyway.
And cut the surtax a bit.
This is our computer, Ernie, who's going to prophesy the verdict.
Thank you very much, lads.
Thank you.
You're not going, are you?
They played in Hull on the 16th, and they were interviewed by a university student. John was asked about books, saying the most recent book he read was A Clockwork Orange, and his favourite was Alice in Wonderland. George announced that in February they would start shooting a second film with Dick Lester, and Paul played piano as they all gave an impromptu performance, attempting and failing at singing Cilla Black's You're My World. For the performance in Hull, the city brought in local rugby league players to protect the Beatles on stage from the fans. On the 18th, the Beatles held a marathon recording session, working on 8 different songs.
The things like Honey Don't and Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, we'd played live so much, we just had to get a sound on that and just do it. But things like Babies in Black, well, that was like learn the songs and rehearse them, and I think we were beginning to do a little bit of overdubbing in those days. It's probably a 4-track.
First on the agenda was a cover of Little Richard's Kansas City, Hey 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 Hey, recorded in just 2 takes, but take 1 was superior by far, so it was labelled best and it became another classic 1-take Beatles performance. Next was a remake of Mr. Moonlight, starting with take 5. The Beatles were still undecided about how to perform the number. Although take 8 was deemed the best, by take 6 they still had to think about the addition of Paul playing the Hammond organ. Next was I Feel Fine. The song opens with what was described in the press at the time as an electronic accident. It was no such thing. Right from take 1, the Beatles had perfected the curious sounding introduction, a Leonard idea of which he was especially proud, with Paul plucking a single bass string and John getting amplifier feedback from his guitar.
Quite often in the early days, John would turn up his guitar as loud as possible, and also everything at full stop. I mean, the knob on his guitar itself would round as far as it would go, and if he got too near the amp, he'd always have howl back, and this quite often ruined some of our good takes. But he loved the sound, and he actually got to the point where he could actually control it, and he used this as an idea to start off the track. And so you hear this feedback, I think it's the first time it was ever done actually, as an intro to the song.
I defy anybody to find the record unless it's some old blues record in 1922, the first pop record, where I had this electric acoustic guitar and it would feed back, and the little intro which goes is the first feedback. I claim it for the Beatles.
He loved things like that. He loved weird kind of effects, and it was his idea. It was great.
I seem to remember that John and George had Everly Brothers Gibsons.
Yeah, well, we had these big Gibson round
We
sound
call them Everly
electric
Brothers.
ones.
They looked like the Everlys had used. And
they were
John put, and so they were electric. They were acoustic, semi-electrics. They had electric facilities, I think. And John leaned his against the amp.
amplifier, yeah.
And then we were just going to go on and talk about the song, and suddenly the A string started feeding back. It we were just, what? Can you do that? You know, so George, well, yes, I did edit on the front or something. So
But
I'm
he
sure
figured out how to do it, you know, because we used to do it on stage then, live. So John figured out, you know, you just had to hit the A, and I get it by the buzzing by the amp.
So that was the start of
So in
all
a
that
way,
Hendrix
John, he
feedback.
invented Jimi Hendrix.
It probably was, actually, you know. Well, you know, once you see somebody messing with feedback, it's a whole field of research, isn't it, as it became later. Yeah. But I'm sure that's how it happened. It wasn't engineered, it came from the accident, and then we made it something we could edit onto the front.
After this, the Beatles recorded an album track, I'll Follow the Sun, with the best version being take 8.
I think if I have a favourite on the album, it is Paul's song of I'll Follow the Sun.
The Beatles rounded off the day recording 3 songs in a total of just 5 takes. George sang lead vocal on a cover of Carl Perkins' Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, and after this somewhat unusual recording, the Beatles performed a one-take recording of Chuck Berry's Rock and Roll Music, with all the Beatles on their familiar instruments and George Martin displaying his prowess as a rock and roll pianist. The song has no overdubs, it's just a magnificent live performance. Finally, John and Paul harmonised on a version of Buddy Holly's Words of Love. Next stop on the UK tour was Scotland. The group flew to Edinburgh on the 19th. They got stuck in a huge crowd, and a guard saw John's face pressed against the window glass and rushed to help him, leaving Paul Brian Epstein alone in the crowd. Next stop was Dundee, where they enjoyed the natural beauty of Scotland, staying near Loch Earn. Robert Whittaker was there to photograph the day, and they were interviewed before the show. They returned to Loch Earn after the show for a second night.
You've travelled so many thousands of miles. Do you never lose the place?
How do you mean, forget where we're going?
Mm.
Oh, aye.
Oh, yes.
Do you know where you are just now?
We're in Cake.
Cake. Where's that?
Dundee. Dundee.
Cake.
Can I just ask you one final question each? You are the idols of so many people in this business. Do you have any idols yourself?
Yes.
John? Who?
George.
Me?
Do you have an idol in show business?
No, don't like anyone.
You don't like anybody?
Yeah, everyone, you know. There are lots of them.
There's no one particular person that
American coloured groups, mainly.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Mm-hmm. Can I just ask you one last question, John? You very kindly sent a message to your Dundee fans when you were in Edinburgh. Can I now ask you to give a message on behalf of the boys to your Aberdeen fans, a city that you're not going to this time?
War barnick near Necrimarkno.
And that goes for all of us.
Yes. Thanks a lot. Hello, Aberdeen.
They travelled back down south over the next few days, playing in Glasgow and then Leeds. In Leeds, John autographed a photo of the Beatles, and on the rear side, there were sketches of the Beatles' upcoming album cover. Next, they travelled to Kilburn and then Walthamstow in North London, and before their show in Walthamstow, it was announced that they would be releasing a new single, I Feel Fine. In Brighton, before their show on the 25th, they were photographed for the Beatles Book Monthly and demonstrated their new single for Sean Mahoney. They were also photographed looking at previous photo shoots and laughing at themselves. Also, while backstage, they were visited by Richard Harris and his kids, and also a clairvoyant read George's palms. The next day was another rest day from the tour, in which the Beatles did anything but rest. Aside from attending all of the mixing sessions, perhaps one of the first times they did this, they also recorded the final batch of songs for their upcoming LP. First was Honey Don't, another Carl Perkins cover version, with Ringo taking the lead vocal. It was perfected in 5 takes, with the 5th being the best. Following which, the group tried a remake of What You're Doing, takes 13 to 19. Only 3 of those 7 were complete, and 19 was considered the best.
Musically, we were learning a lot. You know, this is where we learned a lot of the music and putting together some of the arrangements and things. You know, we're quite quick in the studio when you think about it. 2 songs in 3 hours.
Finally, the Beatles turned their attention towards their official fan club, recording wacky speech and zany versions of Christmas carols for their 2nd annual Christmas Flexi Disc. After the recording session was over, Paul and Ringo, accompanied by Jane and Maureen, went to the Ad Lib Club. The tour continued on the 28th with a show in Exeter. Then they played Plymouth, where they were interviewed by Michael Reinhold.
managed to find your way here all right?
Oh, yes, yes.
Well, what do you think of it?
Very nice. I say, it is rather nice.
How do you find getting through?
Well, we take the B road, you know, keep away from all the traffic.
And how do you get from Exeter here?
In the car, on the B road.
You were a bit late getting to Exeter last night, weren't you?
Yes, last night. Very late, in fact.
What happened?
5 minutes before we went on, in fact. Oh, all sorts happened. It took us longer than we expected, and we stopped to eat, and we got lost, and everything all in all made us late.
Tell us, how long are you going to stay here? What happened to you on the way down to
Only until tonight, and then we leave.
When to next?
Bournemouth tomorrow.
Hello. How much longer are you going to last? That's what we want to know.
Last one?
Last the
year.
pace? No, not last year. Last the pace.
I don't know. Till we get fed up.
What will you do then? Become an MP? Or?
No. A railway driver. Engine driver.
It's better than being on Devon
Or a
Road.
fire engine driver. Something like that.
What appeals to you most?
This at the moment.
Don't even know what it's about yet. What, just sort of
And
standing...
films.
Yeah, you like films?
Yeah, that's all right.
You're going to make another film?
Yeah, February.
Did you vote?
No. Did you?
Well, no, because...
Well, there you go then.
There's
There's two of us, so don't start picking on me if you didn't vote either.
No, well...
See that, Johnny? Hey, comes up here.
Did the other people vote?
I don't think so.
Did you vote?
No.
What would you vote? Oh, you didn't have time?
Very busy. Touring. Nationalist.
Not Tory?
No, I said we're touring.
They finished the month with shows in Bournemouth and Ipswich.
I've seen you interviewed many times, television, screen, watched your films. One question I don't think you've been asked, you probably have, I don't know. Why are you called the Beatles?
Why not?
Come on,
Suppose
just
by
a
any
name.
other name, eh?
Yeah.
It's the name John thought of.
Did John think of it?
Mm-hmm. No, John did.
Who thought of it? Ringo, did you think of it?
John thought of it.
John thought of it.
John thought of it.
John, there's a rumour in the news of the Beatles paper that you might be leaving the group.
Rubbish. I'm
Absolute
contracted. Been trying to get out for years.
You've been writing some
In
poetry.
What paper?
A paper called The News of the Beatles.
Never heard of it.
Do you want to see it?
No.
Must be American. I've got it in my pocket. You want to see
It's
it?
American. They can stick it.
No, it's an English one.
Oh.
You're writing some more
Can we
poetry.
have a look at it, please?
Sure.
Yes.
Hang on to that.
Okay. You're going to look at it now?
Yeah.
Well, good evening, viewers, and welcome to an interview with John McGregor.
That's not a
Thanks,
paper,
John.
is it?
It is. News of the Beatles.
Indeed. You buy cheap papers?
There you are.
You get cheap stories.
Well, I had to find out about the fellow I was interviewing, didn't I? Ringo. Is Ringo your real name or is it a nickname?
It's a nickname.
What's your real name?
Richard.
Richard. How did the Ringo come about?
Because I wear 4 rings.
Wow. Fair enough. Yes. Let me ask you quickly. If you've got...
I'm not called Ringo.
No, I can see that. I hope the camera can.
It's called Hando. Not called Ringo.
Okay.
Take 2.
Good.
Go on.
You've got fame and fortune. If
well.
ever all this disappeared overnight and you were left with one thing you'd like to hang on to, what would that be?
The money.